created with intentionality to deal with the kind of things that we deal with today, right? So when we're talking about a new international bridge crossing, which is sited in Del Rey, it's in the space between, right? Where both Black, white, and Mexican and Latino families are situated, right? But because there's no institutions, it's really difficult actually to get everybody in the same room and agree. So in 2008, 2006, about 10 years ago, Marathon Oil, the only petroleum refinery in the state of Michigan, decided to expand 17 acres to start receiving Canadian tar sands. The organizing around that was incredibly difficult, right? Because it was not only about the community around it, 48217, and the folks in Detroit point blank that say, hey, industry is our job, right? So there was never this idea about well, we need to fight that thing. Now industry is not our job, right? With the sort of whittling down of the American workforce, it's mostly white workers who are working in these factories and who don't live in these communities, right? So really, toxicity is our job, maintaining our health, maintaining our families, and trying to hold it together. Organizing in the neighborhood, we did things like a White Cross campaign with the Sierra Club, Rhonda Anderson at the helm, and community residents who said, if you have cancer in your house, put a White Cross in your front yard. And so we did that door to door. 17 cases of cancer on one block, right? Things like this. Well, just this week, 5 people in the last couple weeks have told me they either have a brain tumor or cancer in my neighborhood, right? And these are people who have stayed post-NAFTA, right? They're not the people who left and came back. That's sort of our story, right? But that really, when those trucks were chugging, right, bringing all those goods across the border, that's sitting there and breathing that in day and day out. But can we fight these things together, right? And that's really the challenge in Detroit, right? Is trying to figure out in Southwest Detroit, if it's Del Rey that's building a new bridge, right? How can we work in solidarity? If it's 48217, right? If it's the new migrants from Yemen or from Iraq who are settling in these houses, new migrants from Mexico that are settling in these houses where people have left because they know it's toxic, right? And have, again, social, political, churches, mosques, schools together, right? How do we begin to bridge those gaps? And these are the discussions that we're having in Detroit, and this is the struggle. Simone Segovac is a neighbor of mine who has been doing organizing in Del Rey, and honestly, I don't know if she ever sleeps. She's really amazing. And what they've been doing for Del Rey in the coming of the new international trade crossing, which Canada will be building and will be paying for, that lands in Detroit, is doing health surveys, right? Going door to door and asking people, do you have cancer? So that in 20 years from now, we can actually prove that we knew it was gonna happen. I mean, that's kind of, that's where we're at with sort of what Julie was talking about, that, trying to accommodate to a technocratic mode of intervention where we're trying to forestall what we know that they're gonna say. Right? So we did the White Cross campaign to try to convince the state of Michigan to do a cancer cluster study in 48217 because they said they wouldn't do it on their own accord. When they finally went to legislature and Rashida Tlaib got a line item to do that cancer cluster study, Michigan Department of Community Health did some pulled up the cancer and they said, oh yeah, there's more lung cancer here than in other places in Michigan, right? And just sort of put it in a file. ATSDR came in and said, there's no actual real evidence that this community has more cancer than any other community. Sort of the same thing we heard from Julie. But it doesn't mean that we don't know what we're talking about. So a lot of the work is around cultural production, right? And a lot of the work is around trying to build those relationships, you know? So when Mary said, yeah, you know, what is the way to begin to do activism? And we the people of Detroit, I don't think have a relationship with we the people, but
That's it.
not yet. Yeah, oh, that'd be awesome. Define activism as, you know, overactive people who have compassion and empathy for their community, and who make sacrifices to change that. And I would even go further in saying in trying to collectivize the response, because that's really what is the difficult part, is finding other people who will work with you to bring down these systems. What the challenge is that you can't play a game on their rules because it won't change it. So we have to create our own systems and relationships to be able to build and undo that legacy of segregation, that legacy of structured and structural racism, that hierarchy. And it is so much more about just environment, right? It is so much more about just the air you breathe. So when we're talking, it's about who, you know, whose kid goes where to school, and you know, what it's like to get up at 5 in the morning to take your kid to a school in another town because the bus system doesn't work and because that school just closed. Even though what you came into it for, what I came into it for was about toxicity, right? It was about like, Marathon Oil is killing our community, right? Like climate change is happening and people are gonna die and are dying. And that was my frame, but learning from people, learning the history from conversation, being in relationship with people, trying to change that together, even if it's not my issue, and working on dismantling these internalized oppressions that we all do and manifest and re-manifest every time something comes up. So I'm not keeping time, but I should 2 more minutes. So internalized oppression, I could give you so many examples, but I think the point of the story is that what does it mean to be in activism for me is being in relationship with people, learning how to be accountable to them and sharing in story, sharing in experience, learning how to be in a relationship of mutuality, so that if you are taking something, right, whether it's a story or scholarship or whatever, like what are you giving back to the community? Being in spirit and understanding that actually just the reproduction of this kind of knowledge, that there's actually, it's a resource, and that reproduction of this knowledge could put people at risk. So understanding the risks and the benefits, and then working on acting together collectively, right, on things that might not necessarily benefit you, but could bring some benefit to community.